Hello, you all, and welcome back to Living Unveiled with Maddie. Now, over the next few days, I want us to spend some time talking about marriage, not simply about relationships, compatibility, or communication. This conversation is already happening everywhere. What we want to examine is something deeper, the spiritual meaning of marriage. Because when we step back and look honestly at what is happening around us, something becomes very clear. We're not simply seeing a few marriages struggle, we are witnessing what increasingly looks like a pandemic in marriage. Divorce has become commonplace. Many couples delay marriage indefinitely. Others enter into marriage but struggle to sustain it. And even where divorce does not happen, many marriages quietly carry disappointment, tension, and distance. The numbers themselves reflect this reality. According to the American Psychology Association, roughly 40 to 50% of marriages in the United States end up in divorce. Marriage itself has also been steadily declining. In 1960, about 72% of American adults were married. Today, that number has fallen to roughly half of the adult population. At the same time, living together before marriage has become extremely common. Many couples now cohabit first, hoping proximity will somehow guarantee compatibility. But studies consistently show that relationships that began this way often experience greater instability later on. So what we're seeing is not simply changing social preferences, it is something deeper that is happening. Scripture gives language to moments like this. In Psalm 11 verse 3, we are asked a sobering question that if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Marriage is one of those foundations, and when foundations begin to weaken across an entire generation, the effects ripple everywhere. But before we go deeper into that, let me tell you something I remember from years ago. I remember those days before access to the internet became common. If people wanted to know something about someone, they had ways of finding out. When a young man made his intention known that he wanted to marry a particular woman, things did not simply move forward immediately. Very often, without the young man even knowing, members of his family would quietly begin asking questions. An aunt, an uncle, sometimes a trusted family friend. They would go to the neighborhood where the woman grew up. They would speak with neighbors. They would ask questions about her character. How does she conduct herself? What kind of family does she come from? Sometimes they would go even deeper. They would look at the patterns in the family. How do the women in the household treat their husbands? How do they handle conflict? What kind of environment shaped her life? To many people today, that might sound intrusive, but in those days, people understood something very important, that marriage was too serious to enter blindly. Marriage did not simply unite two individuals, it joined families, histories, and patterns. And sometimes the patterns that shaped someone's life would quietly shape the marriage that followed. So people paid attention. They asked questions. They also observed characters because they understood something we are slowly forgetting. Marriage was covenant, and covenant carries weight. And sometimes those investigations produced interesting stories. I had a friend once, he's a doctor now, but at that time he was preparing to get married. When he confided in me about the women he was considering, his reasoning surprised me. He said he had simplified the entire decision down to one question: that 20 years from now, after children, how would the wife look? And then he explained his logic. One of the women he was considering had a mother who was quite heavy, According to him, that meant she would most likely become heavy after having children. The other woman's mother was very slim, so in his mind, that justified his choice. Well, it was funny at the time. His reasoning may not have been perfect, but underneath the humor was something I found quite interesting. At least he was thinking long term. And that is something this generation is slowly losing. Now, ask many people today why they marry their partner, and the answers often sound surprisingly light. Some would say he makes me laugh. Others would say she's fun to be around. Oh, we vibe well, we have chemistry. Listen, laughter is beautiful, friendship matters, attraction has its place, but laughter cannot carry a covenant through suffering. Chemistry cannot sustain faithfulness through decades. An attraction cannot hold people together when life becomes heavy, because it will get heavy. Yet, these are now the reasons many people use to make one of the most serious decisions about their lives. Marriage is not tested on the wedding day. Marriage is tested years later when the pressures enter the home, when money becomes tight, when expectations collide with reality, when the children arrive, when sicknesses come, when routine replaces excitement. That is when the foundation becomes visible. Jesus described something very similar in Matthew 7. 2 houses were built, one on a rock, one on sand. Both houses looked stable when the weather was calm. But when the storm came, the difference in foundation became clear. The rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash, as seen in Matthew 7 verse 27. In many ways, what we are witnessing today is a generation trying to build marriages on foundations that cannot carry the weight of life. Part of that shift has been shaped by the world we now live in. We are living in the most convenient era in human history. Food arrives at our doors, shopping happens online, work happens remotely, even church can happen through a screen. Convenience itself is not evil, but convenience shapes expectations. And when a generation grows in a world where almost everything is optimized for ease, something subtle begins to happen. People begin expecting relationships to function in exactly the same way. Effortless, smooth, emotionally rewarding most of the time, but covenant does not function like an app. Covenant requires endurance, it requires patience, it requires forgiveness. Unfortunately today, that order has been reversed. Now, another pattern we see today is the normalization of living together before marriage. Many couples say, let's live together first and see if we're compatible. Let's test the relationship before committing. But covenant was never designed to be tested like a product. Covenant is entered with reverence. Genesis says that a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. In verse 2, Genesis 2:24. The covenant comes first, but this generation has reversed that order. The union comes first, and the covenant becomes optional. There is another question believers really ask themselves. What will happen the day someone who desires heaven discovers that there's no sex in heaven? Jesus said in Matthew 22:30, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. The statement tells us something very profound, that earthly marriage is temporal. And if marriage itself is temporal, then physical expressions within marriage are also temporal. Now, don't misunderstand me. Sex is good. God introduced it within the covenant of marriage. Scripture celebrates intimacy within marriage, but sex was never the purpose of marriage. It was the expression of covenant. And when a generation begins to treat the expression as the purpose, something becomes disordered, because the deepest longing of the human heart was never meant to be satisfied by physical intimacy. It was meant to be satisfied by union with God. Scripture reveals something extraordinary about marriage in Ephesians 5. After describing the relationship between the husband and wife, Paul says, "This mystery is profound, but I am speaking about Christ and the church." Verse 32. Marriage reflects something eternal. It reflects the covenant between Christ and his church, which means marriage or earthly marriage is not the destination. It is only a doorway. A place where God trains the human heart to understand covenants. Because one day, earthly marriage will pass away. But there is one marriage that will never end. As described in Revelation 19 verse 7. The marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. So in this first message, we have simply held up a mirror. We have looked honestly at what is happening around us, but the deeper question still remains. If marriage is a covenant, what exactly is a covenant? Because covenant is not sustained by feelings, it is sustained by faithfulness. And in the next message, we will begin exploring something deeper. What does covenant actually mean, and why understanding covenant may be the most important thing our generation needs to recover? Because when covenant is understood the way God designed it, marriage stops being fragile. It becomes sacred, and sacred things are never treated casually. Until next time, stay unveiled.